It's not just Australians pondering the state of their nation today. In the United States, President Barack Obama delivered a highly anticipated State of the Union address. After the recent shooting of a Democratic Congresswoman in Arizona, the president stressed the need for national unity, but the main focus was on the struggling economy.
Sustaining the American dream has never been about standing pat. It has required each generation to sacrifice and struggle and meet the demands of a new age. And now it's our turn. We know what it takes to compete for the jobs and industries of our time. We need to out-innovate, out-educate, and out-build the rest of the world.
James Fallows is national correspondent for The Atlantic magazine and chair in US media for the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. And I spoke to him earlier from New York. James Fallows, how important is this speech at the midway point of the president's term, and do you think he's delivered? Was it a success?
State of the Union addresses, there is a formulaic, almost kabuki quality to them. As speeches, they are almost always somewhat leaden. They are quite long because the president has to include all the various things he wants to cover in the next year of his administration. So as acts of rhetoric, they never are that important. But as performances, they often can be quite important, at least for a while, in sort of reasserting the president's presence and how he's going to deal with the Congress, and especially in these circumstances where he has a new Republican-controlled, very strongly Republican-controlled House to deal with. It was important from the president's point of view that he be able to say, I'm back, I'm going to be able to deal in these new terms, here's what I have in mind. And I think in terms of setting the tone that President Obama wanted to do, I think it actually was effective. He was able to present his very sweeping defeat in the midterm election as if it had been part of his master plan, saying we did all these things in the first 2 years and now we're ready to work on the various corrections that you all have in mind. So I think from the administration's point of view, I think they will see it as a success.
Very early on in the speech, almost straight away, he talked about the Tucson shooting, he talked about bipartisanship and working together. That's obviously a theme he wants to push.
Yes, and I thought that he referred at the beginning to the new speaker behind him, Speaker Boehner, but also to the empty seat in the chamber belonging to Representative Giffords. I think everybody in the U.S. and his audience recognized that a week or so earlier in his memorial speech at Tucson, President Obama had been very effective, again, from his administration's point of view, of trying to make a bipartisan national unity speech. And so he returned to those themes and wove them through much of the address. There were a couple of times when he made partisan points saying, here is where the Democrats will draw the line. But he tried beginning, middle, and end to say we need to find ways together to deal with the sources of America's long-term either opportunity or difficulty.
There wasn't a lot of policy detail, but the focus was clearly on the economy and on jobs.
Yes, and the first three-quarters of the speech, three-quarters of a very long speech, was a chain of logic which was actually fairly complex by the standards of these presentations for why the president thought that in order to produce more jobs, which everybody agrees is the main both substantive and political issue for the administration and the country, he said the following things had to happen. There had to be more innovation, which required better schooling, which required better funding, et cetera. So there's a quite long theoretical or conceptual argument about how he would like things to evolve, but without too much, as you say, drawing the line of here, here, and here. By contrast, the foreign policy part was, which has to be to some extent in these speeches, was quite abbreviated and just sort of touching the bases he needed to touch about Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on.
The Republicans, who of course now have control of the House of Representatives again, are opposed to his views on spending. How do you think he's going to go at being able to do the things he's saying need to be done?
The president recognized that the Republican argument would be there have to be deep cuts, et cetera. And I think that he was trying to make them face a contradiction that makes it easier to run against deficits, as the Republicans did, than to govern that way. Because simultaneously, the American public is in favor of lower deficits, but also wants lower taxes and wants to have its benefits protected. And as will be obvious, all those things can't be true at once. So I think the president was trying to say, here is my sense. He was proposing a 5-year freeze on discretionary federal spending, which is not much of the budget, but which is some, and other measures to reduce the cost of government. And I think trying to put the onus on them to say, all right, if you want to cut more, let's see exactly where you want to cut more. Do you want to raise taxes? Do you want to cut popular programs like Social Security or medical care? So I think he's trying to engage them on the specifics where he thinks their logic will run into more difficulties than the general anti-deficit appeal held.
When he was talking about innovation, he referred to India and China and the competition coming from there.
Yes, and I think that it is a staple of American life and has been at least over the last 55 years or so since the rise of the Soviet Union to motivate national investment efforts by raising a foreign challenge. Certainly in the Cold War era, it was the Soviet Union. 25 years ago, it was Japan. In the last few years, it's been China in particular, India to a lesser degree. And I think that the president was trying to do both a sort of sophisticated and a low-road version of that argument. The sophisticated version would be, we see in the high-tech industries of the future, whether it's clean tech or medical tech or whatever, that other countries around the world are being able to find ways to invest, to move ahead here. The United States needs to do something to keep up. The low-road version of that argument is we don't want to fall behind. We want the jobs to be here, not someplace else. So I think that the president has actually been artful in his 2 years in office and trying to use this challenge in the right way.
In a sense, is this speech the start of campaigning by Barack Obama to win a second term in office?
Very much so. And I think that campaign probably began just about midnight of November 2nd, becoming November 3rd, as the midterm elections came in. And I think that there are probably three factors which count in the president's favor as he looks this way. You know, nothing is predictable, but these will be three things he has on his side. One is his natural register and tone is towards the middle. Now, some of his critics on the right don't believe that, but his first appearance in the public eye in the Democratic Convention in 2004, he had his famous line about they're not red states or blue states, but the United States of America. He's tried to have this sort of conciliatory tone. That's one factor. A second factor is one expects that the business cycle will be improving a year and a half from now compared to what it is now. If that's not the case, then we really have more severe problems than his reelection. But the unemployment cycle should be in his favor. And finally, the Republicans at the moment don't seem to have an obvious, strong, centrist person to run against him. So anything can change. If we talk 6 months from now, things could look different. But as he plans the re-election positioning, those are things where the wind is with him rather than against him.
James Fallows, thanks for that analysis.
My pleasure. Thank you.